30,000 feet above the desert. The cabin was boring in the way people pay good money for. Until the plane shuddered so hard your teeth would have clicked if you weren't already holding your breath. A sharp bang rolled through the fuselage, like someone hit the aircraft with a giant hammer. The overhead panels rattled, bags shifted, and a few heads snapped up at the same time like a flock of birds startled by thunder. Then the nose dipped, not a gentle dip, a sickening drop that pulled screams out of strangers before anyone could decide to be brave. The engine stopped sounding steady and started sounding wrong, like a lawnmower chewing metal. A second jolt came, heavier, and the cabin lights flickered. For one long second the plane felt weightless, like it forgot how flying works. The seatbelt sign blinked angrily. A child cried somewhere behind you. Someone shouted, "What's happening?" And nobody answered because nobody knew. And then the oxygen masks fell, all at once, with that plastic snap that turns normal fear into real fear. The kind of fear that makes adults pray and makes confident people suddenly speak to the universe like it's a manager who can fix things. Up front, the pilots were talking fast on the radio, voices clipped, controlled, and dangerously tight. Air traffic control answered, and the words "emergency" and "descent" cut through the static like cold water. Passengers leaned into the aisle, trying to see something they could not see. Phones came out with shaking hands, because people record what they can't control. Outside the windows, the sky stayed calm, almost insulting. But the aircraft kept vibrating, like it was holding itself together through pure stubbornness. And then came the sound nobody on a commercial flight expects to hear. A clean, military voice breaking into the chaos. Not a flight attendant, not a pilot, something sharper, something official, something that does not ask politely. "Commercial flight. This is Raptor Lead. We are on your left wing," the voice said. Heads turned toward the windows, and there they were, two sleek fighter jets sliding into view like predators pacing an injured animal. People gasped, because in that moment it hit everyone at once. This wasn't just turbulence or a maintenance issue. This was a situation serious enough that the military had shown up. The radio crackled again, and the next sentence changed the temperature of the entire cabin. "We need to speak to call sign Nightshade immediately," the voice said. Not the captain, not the airline, not air traffic control. A person, a specific person. For a beat, the cabin went silent, the kind of silence that happens right before a crowd picks a target with their eyes. Then one by one, people turned their heads toward the middle rows, scanning seat numbers, searching faces. Because the truth is, everyone wants to believe the person who can save them is sitting somewhere close. And that's when the attention landed on a quiet young woman in seat 31F. She didn't look like anyone important. No uniform, no badge, no confidence on display. Just a tired student type with a cheap backpack and the kind of posture people have when they're trying to disappear. Except now she couldn't disappear if she tried. If you've ever wondered what it looks like when a secret is dragged into the light at 30,000 feet, you're about to see it. Before we get into the full story, comment where you're watching from, and tell me if you would have stayed seated or demanded answers right then and there. A few minutes earlier, seat 31F had been the least interesting place on the plane. That seat is where people sit when they booked late, picked cheapest, or just didn't care. It's where you end up next to the engine noise, the bathroom traffic, and the emotional support backpacks. The young woman there looked exactly like someone trying to survive graduate school on caffeine and stubbornness. Her hair was twisted into a messy knot that said, "I gave up arguing with it." She wore a faded hoodie with a university logo that had seen too many washes. Her jeans were worn at the knees, like she'd spent too many nights on hard floors, hunched over deadlines. And her whole world was packed into one battered backpack stuffed with thick textbooks, loose papers, and a charger that looked like it had been repaired more than once. Her laptop was balanced on the tiny tray table like a plate at a crowded buffet. On the screen, lines of math and diagrams filled the page, the kind of stuff that makes most people blink twice and decide it's none of their business. She typed steadily, not fast, but focused, like she was racing a clock only she could see. The flight attendant, a friendly guy named Troy, rolled his cart down the aisle with that forced cheer that says, "Please don't make this weird." He stopped at her row and handed her a small bag of pretzels. "Big exam coming up?" he asked, nodding at the stack of books. She didn't smile, not because she was rude, but because her mind was clearly somewhere else. Dissertation, she said, eyes still on the screen, trying to finish before the defense. The man in the middle seat, neat haircut, expensive watch, the kind of person who says quick call and means 40 minutes, glanced over despite himself. He wasn't trying to snoop, but the equations were basically shouting. He squinted, then leaned back like he'd just seen a foreign language he almost understood. That's aerospace stuff, right? He asked, half impressed, half confused. She paused for just a fraction of a second. Not long enough for a normal person to notice, but long enough for someone sharp to feel a door quietly closing. Something like that, she said, and with one smooth movement, she shifted a window on the screen. The complicated page vanished behind a plain document filled with harmless notes and boring headings. The kind of thing that screams, nothing interesting here. The businessman tried again, curious now. So you're, what? Building rockets, he joked. She gave the smallest shrug, the kind that ends conversations without being impolite. Just research, she said, calm and careful. Theoretical work. And that should have been the end of it. Because on a normal flight, people respect invisible boundaries. They put their headphones back on, return to their screens, and pretend the strangers beside them don't exist. But there was something about her that didn't match the outfit. Not her clothes. Those were perfectly ordinary. It was the way she held herself, like someone who's used to staying calm under pressure. Like someone trained to listen more than she speaks. Troy, the flight attendant, moved on, the cart squeaking away. The businessman went back to his emails. And seat 31F returned to being invisible. At least, it did until the sky punched the plane and the entire cabin learned that the broke student in the back row was the one person the military wanted on the radio. What no one in that cabin could have guessed was that the quiet woman in seat 31F wasn't just hiding from small talk. She was hiding from an entire life that wasn't supposed to exist in public. Her real name wasn't the one printed on the boarding pass. And the research on her laptop wasn't just academic curiosity. It was camouflage, carefully built and obsessively maintained. By day, on paper, and in classrooms, she was a doctoral candidate at a top engineering school. A brilliant but unremarkable student grinding through equations, deadlines, and committee meetings. The kind of person universities are full of and nobody looks at twice. But behind locked doors and guarded runways, she was something else entirely. A test pilot handpicked for programs so secret that even their names were classified. Aircraft that were never photographed, never acknowledged, and never supposed to fail. Except they often did. Her call sign wasn't a nickname someone picked because it sounded cool. It was earned the hard way, after surviving a flight envelope that had already killed 2 pilots before her. She flew prototypes that pushed past limits written in blood. Hypersonic speeds, unstable frames, experimental systems that failed without warning. The kind of flying where emergency procedures were written after the landing, if there was a landing. Every successful flight added another lock to her file and another layer to her cover. So the Air Force built her a second life. A civilian identity clean enough to survive background checks and boring enough to avoid curiosity. Graduate student, research assistant, conference attendee. It worked almost too well. Her professors thought she was quiet but gifted. Her classmates thought she was intense but tired. Her neighbors thought she was just another student surviving on instant noodles and stress. What they didn't see were the nights she spent switching between worlds. Red-eye flights from secure bases to campus libraries. Encrypted briefings followed by group projects. One day flying machines that bent the laws of physics. The next day arguing about citations and formatting. The double life took a toll. Not the danger. She was used to that. It was the pretending, the constant shrinking of herself to fit into rooms that could never know the truth. The silence when people asked innocent questions she couldn't honestly answer. Lately, she had been thinking about quitting the classified world altogether. Walking away from the programs, the secrecy, the pressure. Letting someone else chase the edge of the map. She told herself she wanted a normal life. A career people could talk about at dinner. A job where mistakes didn't end in investigations or funerals. And as the plane cruised quietly over the desert, her laptop open and her cover intact, she had no idea that in a matter of minutes, both lives were about to collide in front of 137 strangers. At 30,000 feet, with nowhere left to hide. Up in the cockpit, the day had started the way pilots like it. Boring, predictable, almost forgettable. Cruise altitude, steady air, a clear route. The kind of flight where the biggest problem is someone asking if they can use the bathroom during beverage service. Captain Ellis Navarro had been flying commercial jets for years, and he'd seen plenty of minor issues. A warning light that turned out to be a sensor. A rough patch of turbulence that made passengers dramatic. A maintenance message that could wait until landing. But at 2:47 in the afternoon, over New Mexico, the aircraft gave him something different. A sharp alert, loud and immediate. An engine fire warning on the right side. And then the whole plane began to vibrate like a washing machine with a brick inside. Navarro's voice stayed calm because that's what professionals do when their heart rate spikes. "Center, this is Flight 2156. We've got an emergency," he transmitted, clipped and controlled. "We're showing an engine fire warning and severe vibration." Air traffic control came back fast. "Copy. Can you maintain altitude?" Navarro didn't hesitate because hesitating in a cockpit is how problems grow teeth. "Negative," he said. "Right engine has failed. Left engine is showing abnormal readings, declaring an emergency, beginning immediate descent." His first officer, Mia Chun, was already running the checklist, hands moving quickly, eyes scanning instruments. They were trained for this. Engine failure, shut it down, secure it, descend, divert, land. Simple on paper, hard in the air. But the aircraft didn't stop at engine failure. It escalated like it was determined to make the checklist feel useless. A series of booms hit the plane, not one, several, spaced out like someone stomping on the structure from the outside. The cockpit shook, warning chimes stacked on top of each other, and the instrument panel lit up like a holiday display nobody asked for. "We're losing hydraulics," Chin reported, voice tight now. "Controls are getting sluggish." Then worse. Flight controls are becoming unresponsive. That phrase is terrifying in aviation because it means your hands are still moving the yoke, but the aircraft is starting to ignore you. It's the difference between driving a car and pushing a shopping cart on ice. In the cabin, 137 people felt the change instantly. The plane didn't just shake, it shuddered. A low groan ran through the fuselage, the kind of sound you feel in your ribs. Then the oxygen masks dropped with a snap, and panic erupted like somebody opened a door and fear rushed in. People shouted, some prayed, some froze, some tried to stand even though standing made no sense. The flight attendants moved fast, but even they couldn't hide the look in their eyes. Back in 31F, the quiet woman didn't scream. She went still, the way trained people do when a situation turns deadly. Her fingers closed her laptop slowly, deliberately, like she was shutting the door on her cover life. Because she recognized the pattern. Not one failure, but a cascade. Engine destruction, vibrations, explosions, hydraulics bleeding out, controls fading. This wasn't a rough day. This was the kind of chain reaction that ends with a wreckage field and a headline. While everyone else listened for comfort, she listened for information. The pitch of the engines, the rhythm of the vibrations, the subtle changes in attitude. And most of all, the cockpit radio leaking just enough through the cabin walls to tell her the pilots were running out of options. And as the plane dropped through the sky, the emergency wasn't just getting worse. It was drifting into airspace where the wrong crash site would trigger a completely different kind of response. The moment Flight 2156 declared an emergency over New Mexico, it stopped being just an airline problem. Down on the ground, screens lit up in rooms the public never thinks about. Because this wasn't happening over harmless empty land. This part of the Southwest is stitched together with restricted corridors and do not enter zones. Places where the map looks normal but the rules are not. Test ranges, quiet runways, facilities that officially don't exist. And once you drift into those boxes with a crippled aircraft, the response changes from help them land to control what happens next. At North American Aerospace Defense Command, a duty officer leaned over a console and called it in. "Sir, we have a commercial aircraft in restricted echo sector," she reported. "Multiple system failures, possible loss of control." Colonel Grant Harlow, the man on the other end, didn't ask for opinions, he asked for facts. "Aircraft type and souls on board." "Boeing 737, she replied. 137 aboard. They're descending through the high 20s and requesting Albuquerque." Harlow didn't hesitate. "Scramble Raptors," he ordered. "I want eyes on that aircraft, escort it, and keep it out of sensitive ground." And if it goes down inside restricted airspace, he added, voice flat. We control the scene immediately. Minutes later, two F-22 Raptors launched from a nearby base. Not training jets, not a symbolic flyover. This was the kind of launch where people move fast and don't talk much. Major Cole Razor Maddox led the flight, with Captain Aaron Falcon Sloan on his wing. Both cleared for operations in airspace most pilots never even hear about. Raptor flight is airborne, Maddox radioed, climbing hard, proceeding to intercept Flight 2156. Air traffic control vectored them toward the descending airliner. And as the fighters closed the distance, they expected something routine. A damaged plane, a standard escort, keep it calm, keep it safe. But the view that appeared ahead of them wasn't routine at all. When the Raptors slid into position beside the 737, Maddox's stomach tightened. The right engine wasn't just out. It looked torn apart. Metal missing, dark scorch marks staining the wing. Heat damage crawling along the fuselage like a bruise. The kind of visible injury that tells you the aircraft is surviving on borrowed time. Raptor lead has visual, Maddox reported. Right engine appears destroyed. Visible fire damage on wing structure. Aircraft is still in controlled flight, but it's in serious distress. Back at command, that report hit like a second alarm. Because now it wasn't just an emergency. It was an emergency near sensitive airspace with visible structural damage, meaning the margin for error had just shrunk to almost nothing. And while the Raptors held steady, close enough for passengers to see them, close enough to judge every wobble and drift, NORAD did what it always does in situations like this. They pulled the passenger manifest. Not for gossip, for security. Because when a commercial aircraft is in trouble over restricted zones, you need to know exactly who is on board. That routine step, the boring administrative move, was about to punch open the real crisis. Because one name on that list wasn't supposed to be on any civilian flight, anywhere, ever. Back at command, the passenger manifest was supposed to be routine paperwork. A checklist item, a box to tick while the fighters held position and the airliner limped toward a runway. One analyst, Staff Sergeant Lena Perez, ran the names through the usual security filters, half on autopilot. Then she stopped. Not a dramatic stop, a sharp professional freeze. Because one entry didn't behave like a normal civilian record. It wasn't clean. It was empty in all the wrong places and heavy in the hidden ones. Sir, Lena said, stepping quickly to Colonel Grant Harlow with her screen angled like it was radioactive. You need to see seat 31F. Harlow barely looked up at first, because a colonel sees a lot of, you need to see this. Then he read the name, and his face changed in a way that didn't need words. On the manifest, she was listed as a graduate student. In the secure database, she was a different person entirely. Captain Mara Blake, call sign Nightshade. Top-level clearance, experimental flight test community, assigned to a program so sensitive the file name alone carried warnings. Harlow's jaw tightened. Confirm. He snapped, like he could bully uncertainty into disappearing. Confirmed, Lena said, steady. It's her. Active status, current assignment, restricted access. The real profile is locked behind higher authorization. She's one of ours. In that moment, the emergency stopped being a rescue mission and became a security nightmare layered on top of a rescue mission. Because now there was a crippled passenger jet over restricted airspace. And inside it sat a pilot whose identity was protected for reasons that could melt careers. Harlow didn't waste time being angry at the universe. He moved straight to control. Get me a secure line to the Raptors, he ordered. And notify the program office. Right now. Across the sky, Major Maddox and Captain Sloan maintained formation on the wounded 737, watching it wobble slightly as it descended. Their job had been to escort and report. But now a new transmission cut into their headsets, encrypted and urgent. Raptor lead, NORAD, the voice said. Be advised, we have a sensitive asset aboard that aircraft. We need contact immediately. Maddox didn't ask questions on an open channel. He flicked to the secure frequency and replied. Copy, NORAD, say the call sign. A beat. Then the answer. Nightshade. Inside the 737, the cockpit radios could monitor the military frequency. And the moment that call sign went out, it was like a match struck in a dark room. The cabin didn't know what it meant, but it could feel the weight of it. Maddox edged closer, lining his jet where the commercial pilots could see him clearly. Then he transmitted, voice-controlled but unmistakably direct. Commercial Flight 2156, this is Raptor lead on your left wing. We need to speak with call sign Nightshade immediately. Seat 31F went from invisible to magnetic. Heads turned, one row at a time, like a wave traveling through the cabin. The businessman in the middle seat stared at the quiet woman beside him as if she had suddenly grown a second shadow. Did they just call you Nightshade? His eyes asked, even before his mouth could. The flight attendant froze in the aisle, halfway between professional calm and human disbelief. Because a military fighter jet had just asked for a passenger by a call sign. That doesn't happen. Not on a normal day, not in a normal world. Then the intercom chimed, and the captain's voice came through, strained and urgent. Mara Blake, he said, using her real name like he'd been handed it by someone with authority. If you can hear this, we need you in the cockpit immediately. We have a situation that requires your expertise. For half a second, she didn't move. Not because she was scared, but because she understood exactly what that sentence meant. Her cover wasn't slipping, it had shattered. In front of 137 strangers, in a falling aircraft, with fighter jets watching from the windows. She stood up, and the entire cabin went quiet in the most honest way possible. Not polite quiet. Survival quiet. The flight attendant stepped aside like the aisle suddenly belonged to her. The businessman whispered, barely audible. Who are you? She didn't give him drama. Just a small, tired look that said the truth was bigger than he could imagine. It's complicated, she replied. And then she started walking toward the cockpit, leaving her laptop, her notes, and her student life behind. When she reached the cockpit door, the flight attendant didn't have to ask twice. One look at her face and one look at the chaos up front, and he punched in the code with shaking fingers. The door opened, and the sound inside hit her like heat. Warning chimes, clipped voices, systems yelling in digital tones. She stepped in, and the pilots turned at the same time. Captain Ellis Navarro looked like a man holding a steering wheel on a sliding sheet of ice. First Officer Mia Chun had a checklist open, but the checklist was losing the argument. The instrument panel was lit up in every color Aviation uses to say, "You're running out of time." It really did look like a Christmas tree, except nobody was celebrating. Navarro didn't waste breath on introductions. "You're Captain Blake," he said, like he still couldn't believe he was saying it. "We've lost the right engine. The left is running rough and dropping power. We've got primary hydraulics gone, backups are degrading, and the controls are not responding the way they should." Mara's posture changed in a way that didn't need a uniform. The tired student vanished. What stood in her place was a pilot, focused, economical, calm. Her eyes flicked across the panel once, not scanning like a learner, reading like a native speaker. "How much fuel?" she asked. "About 45 minutes at current burn," Chen answered. Then added, "Because honesty matters in emergencies. And we're burning more than I like." "Nearest runway," Mara said. "Albuquerque is the goal," Navarro replied. "About 60 miles northeast." "But with the descent rate and the way she's handling." He nodded at the yoke like it was misbehaving. "I don't know if we can make it." Mara didn't argue. She calculated. In her head, fast and quiet, the kind of mental math built from years of ugly situations and worse outcomes. She listened to the engine note, felt the vibration through the floor, watched the airspeed trend like it was a heartbeat. "We're making Albuquerque," she said finally, flat certainty. Then she looked at Navarro, not unkindly, just direct. "But we're not doing it the way your manual expects." Chen blinked, caught between relief and confusion. Navarro exhaled like he'd been holding his breath since the first bang. "What do you need?" he asked, because at this point pride was irrelevant. Mara reached for the radio stack and switched to the secure frequency like it was muscle memory. "Raptor lead, this is Nightshade," she transmitted, voice steady. "I'm in the cockpit with the crew. I've assessed the failures." The response came back instantly, and the tone changed. Professional before, now there was something like respect. "Nightshade, Raptor lead," Major Maddox replied. "Ma'am, we're with you. What do you need?" Mara didn't waste time on hero lines. "Coordinate with Albuquerque Tower and get us priority straight in," she said. "I need real-time winds, gusts, and runway conditions. And I need you to watch our approach path and call out deviations. With these controls, We may not feel drift until it's too late. Copy all, Maddox answered. We'll feed you weather continuously and call your line. You're not alone up here. That sentence hit Navarro harder than he expected, because pilots are trained to solve problems in their cockpit. But this problem had outgrown the cockpit. Mara turned back to the crew. Okay, she said, and her voice softened just enough to keep them steady. Here's what's happening. Your procedures assume you have normal control authority. We don't. So we're going to fly this aircraft like it's damaged, because it is. Navarro frowned. Like what? Like a glider, Mara answered. And when she saw the doubt flash across Chen's face, she cut in before it could grow. I'm not asking you to do anything reckless. I'm asking you to manage energy instead of chasing control you don't have. Chen shook her head once, half instinct, half training. That's not how we're taught, she said, and there was fear under it. Not fear of dying, fear of breaking the rules that had kept her alive so far. Mara nodded, because she understood that fear. Commercial training assumes the airplane is mostly intact, she said. When systems fail in a cascade, you need techniques that don't depend on those systems. This is about physics, not paperwork. Then she started giving instructions, clear and paced. Reduce thrust on the left engine to minimum stable. We're going to stop fighting the oscillations. Trim what we can, then hold a clean profile. We keep our airspeed in a safe window and use gravity to do the work. Navarro hesitated, then followed the direction, hands careful. The vibration didn't vanish, but it changed. Less angry, more manageable, like the aircraft had stopped panicking. Out on the wing, the Raptors watched the 737's attitude shift subtly, smoother than before. Captain Sloan's voice came over the fighter channel, amazed. Razor, are you seeing this? I'm seeing it, Maddox replied. She's settling the airliner like she's flown it her whole life. In the cockpit, Mara kept going. Not flashy, not loud, just relentless clarity. Captain Navarro, she said, you're still flying. I'm just changing the rules of the game. And if we do this right, we're going to put this jet on that runway. The closer they got to Albuquerque, the more the cockpit started to feel like a countdown. Altitude bleeding off, fuel ticking down, systems refusing to behave. And every mile closer to the runway also meant 1 mile less to fix mistakes. Mara kept her voice level on purpose. Calm isn't just a personality in a cockpit, it's a tool. It keeps everyone's hands steady and their brains online. Raptor lead, give me winds, she said. Major Maddox replied immediately. Winds are shifting, moderate gusts. I'll call changes in real time. Tower, this is flight 2156 heavy emergency inbound, Mara transmitted, taking the radio like she owned it. Be advised we are not fully controllable. We are using non-standard procedures due to multiple system failures. Albuquerque Tower didn't ask questions that didn't matter. Flight 2156, runway 26 is cleared, the controller answered. Emergency equipment standing by. Mara looked at Navarro. Runway is ours, she said. But we still have to earn it. She leaned forward and pointed with 2 fingers at the instruments he was watching too hard. Stop chasing the perfect numbers, she told him. Chase stability. If you fight her, you lose energy. If you work with her, you buy distance. Navarro swallowed, nodded once. His hands were on the controls, but you could see the strain in his shoulders. He was trained for emergencies. He was not trained to feel an aircraft ignore him in pieces. As they descended through 10,000 feet, the air thickened and the turbulence sharpened. The battered 737 started to wobble again, small rolls and shivers like a wounded animal trying not to show weakness. Passengers in the cabin were silent now. Not calm, just past the point of screaming. The kind of silence where people grip armrests and bargain with the sky. Mara switched back to the fighter frequency. Raptor flight, I need eyes on our line, she said. Call drift early. Copy, Nightshade, Maddox replied. We've got you all the way down. Now came the part that separated landing from impact. Mara turned to Navarro. What I'm about to have you do is going to feel wrong, she said. Because you've spent your whole career using control surfaces for pitch. But your elevators are not giving you what you need. So we're going to use thrust. Navarro stared, processing. Use thrust for pitch, he repeated, like the words tasted strange. Mara nodded. Small changes, she said. Gentle. Thrust up to lift the nose. Thrust down to let it settle. Don't overcorrect. On approach, The runway finally came into view, a strip of concrete that looked both too thin and too precious. Chin called out speeds. Navarro called back confirmations. And Mara stayed locked on the energy picture. Airspeed, descent rate, distance, gusts. Everything that mattered, nothing that didn't. Looking good, Maddox reported. On glide path. Minor crosswind building. Mara's eyes didn't leave the windshield. Copy, she said. Navarro, hold it. Trust the technique. At 1,000 feet, the jet felt almost stable, almost normal, just enough to tempt you into thinking the crisis was over. Mara didn't fall for that. Crisis endings love last-minute surprises. At 500 feet, the gust hit hard. The aircraft drifted left, just enough to put the runway centerline sliding away like it was being pulled by a string. Navarro's breathing changed, sharp and fast. His hands tightened, and the instinct to fight the aircraft surged. Easy, Mara said, voice cutting through his panic like a hand on the shoulder. Don't wrestle. Correct with thrust. Small input, now. Navarro started to yank, then stopped himself. He followed her instructions, making a controlled adjustment instead of a desperate one. The nose steadied, the drift slowed. The runway centerline came back under them like a promise returning. You're back, Mara said immediately, reinforcing the wind before fear could take it away. Hold it. Hold it. 200 feet. 100. The ground rushed up fast, too fast. Let her settle, Mara said. Don't force it. The main wheels hit the runway with a heavy slam. Not pretty, not gentle, but real. The kind of touchdown that says, we made it. Not, we performed. The aircraft bounced once, then came down again. Navarro kept it centered with stubborn precision, correcting carefully, refusing to let panic touch the controls again. And then they were rolling, fast, loud, alive. Emergency vehicles sprinted alongside them, lights flashing, ready for fire. Ready for injuries, ready for anything. Mara watched the speed bleed off, watched the runway markings pass, watched the chaos turn into motion that made sense. Finally, the jet slowed enough to breathe. Navarro eased it down to a stop, hands still gripping the yoke like it might try to escape. Tower came through, almost relieved. Flight 2156, outstanding job. In the cabin, the applause didn't start politely. It exploded, like everyone's lungs remembered how to work at the same time. People cried, people laughed, people hugged strangers. Somebody shouted, "We're alive," as if saying it out loud would make it more true. Outside, the Raptors stayed with them. And then, as the airliner sat surrounded by emergency crews, the fighters roared overhead in a clean, deliberate flyby. A salute. Not for the airline, not for the aircraft. For the woman whose call sign had just turned a falling plane into a landing. The moment the aircraft stopped, the cabin became a different world. Not calm, not normal, just flooded with relief so intense it made people shake. Hands clapped until palms hurt. People cried without embarrassment. And a few just sat there staring forward like their brains needed extra time to accept that the story didn't end in fire. Outside the windows, emergency vehicles surrounded the jet in a bright ring of flashing lights. Fire crews ready, medics waiting, police standing by. It looked like an action movie set, except every face out there was deadly serious. In the cockpit, Captain Navarro finally exhaled the breath he'd been holding since the first engine warning. He turned toward Mara like he wasn't sure whether to say thank you or how. Mara gave him a small nod, not triumphant, not dramatic. More like, we did the job, now keep moving. When the doors opened and passengers began to deplane, the aisle turned into a slow parade of stunned gratitude. People didn't just walk off. They stopped, looked at Mara like they needed proof she was real, and then said things that came out messy because emotions don't speak in complete sentences. Thank you. I thought we were. I have kids. You saved us. The businessman from her row waited until the end, like he'd been sitting on a question he couldn't swallow. When he reached her, he looked her up and down, still trying to reconcile the hoodie and torn jeans with what he had just witnessed. I can't believe I was sitting next to you, he said, voice low, respectful now. Why didn't you tell me who you were? Mara's smile was brief and tired. Because I wasn't supposed to be anyone, she said. Not out here. And then, right on cue, the modern world did what it always does. It turned a moment into a headline before the adrenaline even left her bloodstream. Someone had filmed the fighter jets. Someone had recorded the captain calling her name. Someone had captured the words, "Nightshade," and "We need to speak to her immediately," and posted it like a trophy. By the time the last passenger stepped onto the tarmac, the footage was already spreading. Clipped, reposted, miscaptioned, translated, amplified. Within hours, aviation forums were on fire. By nightfall, mainstream outlets had it. Student revealed as elite military pilot. Secret test pilot saves commercial flight. The world loves a twist, especially when it comes with fighter jets and survival. But inside the military, it wasn't a twist, it was a problem. A serious, expensive, complicated problem. Because her cover identity wasn't just a personal choice. It was part of a security wall built to protect programs that could not afford sunlight. That same night, Mara was escorted into a secure briefing room at Kirtland. No cameras, no windows, no casual tone. A colonel with a stiff posture and a tired face, Richard Vance, stood at the front with a folder that looked too thick to be good news. "Captain Blake," he began, voice measured. "Your actions saved 137 lives." Then he paused, not for drama, but because the next sentence was a weight. "And you compromised highly sensitive work." Mara didn't flinch. "I understand," she said, "but I wasn't going to let them die to protect my cover." For a second, the room was silent. Then Vance nodded once, the closest thing to approval a career officer gives in a situation this messy. "We are not criticizing your decision," he said. "We're dealing with the consequences." Because the consequences were immediate. Her civilian identity was done, permanently. The university cover story, the quiet research role, the ability to move unnoticed. All gone. And worse, intelligence teams now had to assume that foreign services would take interest. That journalists would dig. That hobbyists would connect dots. That online communities would do what they do best, collaboratively tear down secrecy for entertainment. The Air Force had just lost one of its most protected assets in the loudest way possible. And yet, nobody in that room could call her actions wrong. Not when the alternative was a crater and 137 dead civilians. So the briefing ended with the only honest conclusion. Her old life was over. The question now wasn't whether she'd be punished. It was what they could possibly do with a pilot who had become famous for doing the one thing the secret world is designed to prevent: being seen. 2 weeks after the emergency landing, Mara walked into a building where every hallway felt like a decision. Pentagon lighting, Pentagon silence, Pentagon faces that never reveal what they're thinking. She was brought into a conference room with flags in the corner and a table long enough to make you feel small on purpose. At the head sat General Elena Marquez, calm and sharp, the kind of leader who didn't need to raise her voice to control a room. She didn't open with praise or ceremony. She opened with reality. "Captain Blake," she said, "your cover is not recoverable. Your previous assignment is not viable in the way it was." Then she leaned forward slightly. "But we are not wasting what you did." Mara's hands stayed folded. She'd expected consequences, reassignment, maybe a quiet retirement to keep her out of sight. What she didn't expect was the next line. "We're creating a role specifically for you," General Marquez continued. "You will be the military liaison for civilian aviation safety. You will help translate advanced emergency techniques into training that airline pilots can actually use." Mara blinked once, slow, as if she needed to check she heard correctly. The military, openly sharing hard-earned methods with civilian aviation. That was not normal. "The incident proved something," the general said. "Knowledge developed in secret can save people in public. And if we bury it, we're choosing secrecy over lives." Mara didn't give a grand speech. She just nodded, because the mission finally matched the moral math she'd been doing in her head for years. "I want what happened on that flight to stop being luck," she said. "I want it to be training." 6 months later, she stood at the FAA Training Center in Oklahoma City. A plane room, a simulator bay, and a class full of airline captains who had flown thousands of hours and still looked nervous. Not because they were weak, because they knew the difference between routine emergencies and the kind that eat checklists alive. Mara wrote one phrase on the board, simple, almost annoying in how obvious it looked. "Energy is life." Then she turned to the room. "The techniques you're about to learn were built for aircraft that fail in ways commercial flying tries not to imagine," she told them. They are not magic. They're physics. And they can buy you time when time is the only thing you don't have. She used Flight 2156 as the case study, not for glory, but for credibility. When I walked into that cockpit, she said, I had never flown that exact aircraft model. But I understood what the plane needed. And I understood how to teach a crew to give it that. The pilots watched her demonstrate methods that felt counterintuitive at first. Using thrust to manage pitch when traditional surfaces were degraded. Stretching glide range with strict energy control. Reducing oscillations by stopping the fight and stabilizing the profile. It wasn't flashy. It was brutally practical. One captain raised a hand. Why didn't we have this before? He asked, not accusing, just honestly stunned. Mara didn't dodge it. Because some of it was born in places that don't like being discussed, she said. But that wall is lower now. Because your passengers don't care where a technique came from. They care if it works. Then something happened that made the whole program impossible to ignore. It started working. Within a year, multiple commercial crews used variations of Mara's methods to land aircraft that would previously have been written off as unrecoverable. Different failures, different situations, same principle. When systems lie to you, physics doesn't. Airlines began sending their senior pilots. International regulators asked for the curriculum. And the gap between military test knowledge and civilian safety, the one everyone pretended was unbridgeable, got smaller fast. Mara's career changed shape too. She didn't stop flying entirely, but now her flying fed into something larger. Every hard lesson earned on the edge of the envelope could be turned into something that saved strangers in ordinary cabins. Not just Americans, anyone, anywhere. 2 years after Flight 2156, she stood on a small stage at Edwards for a promotion ceremony. Her new rank pinned on, her new assignment read aloud. A joint military-civilian test program focused on emergency procedures that work across both worlds. In the crowd were familiar faces. Captain Navarro and First Officer Chun, no longer haunted, now proud. Major Maddox and Captain Sloan, the Raptor pilots who had watched a battered airliner land like it had no right to. And a handful of passengers from seat rows that would forever feel personal, including the businessman from 31F. When he spoke to the room, he didn't talk like a politician. He talked like someone who had stared straight at the end and been handed another chance. She looked like a tired student, he said. But she was the most capable person on that aircraft. And none of us knew. Years passed, and Mara's work kept expanding. Her manuals became standard reading in more than one country. Her techniques quietly folded into simulator training. Not as classified tricks, but as advanced emergency handling. The kind of knowledge you hope you never need. And thank everything you have it when you do. In her office, there was one photo she refused to replace with anything heroic. Not the runway, not the Raptors, not the ceremony. A simple picture of her sitting in seat 31F with a laptop, looking like nobody. Because that was the point. Extraordinary ability doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it wears old clothes, keeps its head down, and tries to finish a dissertation. And sometimes, when the sky turns violent and the rules stop working, that hidden person becomes exactly who they always were. Not a student, not a secret, a pilot. And a reminder that when knowledge can save lives, hiding it is the real risk.